Hi, it's Josh, your Goth Fragrance Bestie. I believe perfume is a language that speaks to us, not in words and colors, but in emotions and memories. In Goth Fragrance Dialogues, we will be listening to people who channel and craft that language for us. In this episode of Goth Fragrance Dialogues, I've traveled to LA to speak with Na-Moya and Debbie of Samar.
Talking about myself makes me nervous. I know. I don't know why. So, I'm Debbie. I grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii. It was a great place to grow up. A lot of outdoor activities, but just spent most of my time either doing homework or sometimes going to the beach and spending time with friends or things like that. And then I got into University of Washington in Seattle, and so I moved there when I was 17, and I went to school for management information systems, and then I got an internship with Washington-based company and worked there for many years. I was there it just made 20 years there, and I worked in IT the entire time. That's basically my background is I liked a lot of variety, so just talking with people, like a mix of kind of talking with people, kind of understanding what their needs were, and then doing some technical work to get that done. And it's, I guess, not super similar to perfumery, but there's that end-to-end piece of the process that I really like. I like kind of having a lot of variety in what I do, and with perfumery now we have a lot of creativity that goes into that, but maybe I'll talk about that a little bit later. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Na-Moya. I was born in Jamaica in Montego Bay, and my family is mostly in a small hill town called the Kampong. I moved to the U.S. when I was a infant, and I moved to Vancouver, Washington, which was definitely a big change. It is not nearly as warm or beachy or as friendly. But I spent most of my childhood there, and I was really big into D&D. I played a bunch of different sports, and I spent so much time at the library and developed a strong relationship to storytelling. I was that kid that the librarians knew that I knew how everything was organized, so they would let me help them reshelve the book. And then after that, I got into Western Washington University up in Bellingham, Washington, and I spent 10 years there I earned my degree, not in 10 years, but I got my degree in creative writing and American cultural studies, which helped me just kind of flex my desire to write and create stories, as well as study different political movements and forms of protest. I met some of my best friends there, so Bellingham actually has a really big part of my heart, even though at the time I didn't appreciate it, I think, the way I could have. And then I met Debbie in Seattle at a fun little queer dance night, and she absconded with me to Seattle, and that's kind of how our relationship started. And then Samar became a natural segue after that, and we'll talk about that a bit more.
So we moved in April.
Yes,
but it kind of feels like 2 months because we, had some traveling in between. So, we went to Portugal for the Art North Action Awards and made a little bit of a vacation of it. And I've been traveling quite a bit over the summer for work to finish up a large project. But I'm actually wrapping that up, and I will be switching over to doing some more full time here in the next month or two.
So I moved to the U.S. when I was 4, but then we returned to Jamaica when I was 7 for my great-grandmother's funeral. And that was the time that I ever first saw a human body without the person in it. And just she was just so gray and small and just frail in the casket. And I think that image really stuck in my brain for the rest of the time that we were there. And so the scent memory that I have connected to that was actually the celebration of life that my family threw for her in a kampong. And it was such a strange experience because I remember that being one of the most like joyful childhood memories, but also I had months of nightmares after just like seeing my grandmother like that, my great grandmother like that. But the celebration of life, like I was a kid and I didn't have the same understanding of grief that like my older relatives had. I was mostly just like excited that I got to see my cousins again and got to be back in Jamaica where I didn't feel as like kind of isolated as I had in the US because there was no Jamaican community in Vancouver. We didn't move to New York, we didn't move to DC, we moved to Vancouver, Washington. And at the celebration of life, there were like the air had that kind of thickness when it's about to rain. And so you had that like that petrichor quality, and there's almost like electricity in the air, like when a rainstorm is gonna come. And there was like the kind of like wet earth, like the sweetness that comes off of it, and a little bit of the blood and tang from the goats my uncles had butchered for the celebration meal. And then just like the like buttery sugar cookies that someone had made and passed out to all the kids. And so it was this like sweet, kind of salty, very just like atmospheric moment that's like locked into my memory. And I know it's not the first one, but first like scent memory, but it's definitely the one that I'm just like, when someone asked me, like, that's the one. Yeah.
Graphic.
It's very graphic. It's the one that I would definitely make into a perfume if we were to do a collection that's just like our own childhood memories, like encapsulated.
My first set memories are really food related. I think some of the strongest ones are like the smell of sauteing garlic. My parents would we would use garlic for any vegetable that we were cooking. They would saute garlic first, and like that is probably one of my first scent memories, just because it's so like distinctive. But I think my favorite scent memories were related to when my mom would bake. She didn't do it very often, but she had this famous almond angel food cake that she would make, and it just like the almond and the vanilla and like a lot of egg whites and like the kind of caramelized like Maillard. It was like, I wanted her to make the cake all the time, and like that, it's like a really strong memory for me. That, and we had a mango tree in our backyard, and so we picked the mangoes when they weren't totally ripe because the birds would eat them if we left them on the tree too long, and so they'd ripen in the house, and just like smelling like the stem area, like of a perfectly ripe mango, it's like that was so beautiful. I mean, it was really a pandemic project. It was just a few months into lockdown, and we didn't know how much longer it was going to be, and we're spending almost usually 24 hours a day like in the apartment, and we're like, well, let's work on a hobby together. Let's like kind of think of what would be something fun that we could do that would be sustainable. It wouldn't just be like a small project and then kind of pick up and then was put back down. So we talked about a lot of different ideas, and we ended up kind of talking about like our love. We do have a love for food, but also like scent, but more environmental scent versus like fragrance. Like I mentioned, I never really kind of I never really had an emotional kind of attachment or reaction to perfumes, but so that's what I mentioned. I was like, well, I mean, how am I going to make a perfume? Like, I don't really like, or I don't love the perfumes that we have. So how, where would I get inspiration from? And, and I was like, well, we could do anything. You could make a perfume smell like anything you want, right? What kinds of fragrances, what kinds of experiences resonate with you, and what would you want to create and share with other people?
And like Debbie, growing up, I didn't really have a strong attachment to perfumes either. One of my first like perfume specific memories. I was at the mall with my mom at a Nordstrom's, and she loved perfumes. Like, she loved to collect them. And so we went in to the counter, and the sales associate was helping her and getting her samples to smell. And we were there for maybe 30 minutes or so. And then I started feeling nauseous, and we started leaving the Nordstrom, and right at the entrance, I just yacked all over. And I feel like that stuck in my brain a little bit as my association to perfumes, just like something that makes you feel a bit sick or gives you a headache. And it wasn't until much later when I actually found my first indie perfume, which was Immortal Perfumes in Seattle. And I really love how JT creates, and I tried the first perfume that I went, oh, I really enjoy this. I could see myself wearing this. And it was Unhallowed Arts, which is actually one of her favorites in her collection that's not very popular. And so that was kind of the first time I had the idea of, like, you can do a lot with perfume. It doesn't have to be the things that we conventionally have seen. And so when we were having that conversation, it brought me back to Immortal Perfumes, to perfumers like Black Baccara, who have like popcorn notes in their perfume. Like, why not? If we can imagine it, why not just like set forth and see what we can do?
You know, we talk about kind of pros and cons for what we should kind of start on, talk about ideas for what the notes should be in each of the perfumes, and then come up with, you know, once we've kind of decided, okay, these are probably like the next two that I'll be working on, these are the next two you'll be working on, coming up with briefs, just because we want to have the concept, you know, really firm in our mind. We want to have, you know, a lot of our stuff, like I guess all of it, is environmental, right? We wanted to really evoke very specific experiences, and how do we best do that with, you know, a handful of notes? We don't want to overwhelm people. We want it to be we don't want them to be recognizable. So it's just kind of going through that process of deciding on what that should look like.
Yeah, and also when we're sourcing our materials too, we will pay attention to what the suppliers use for their descriptors for material, but we always make sure to evaluate them first ourselves, because those descriptors are just kind of suggestions and jumping off points. But sometimes we found that once we smell it, we can see a novel way of using it to create an accord for something else. And so, yeah, I think we just try not to get too locked into like what the process has to be, and we just kind of make sure that we're working towards the initial inspiration.
80-90% of it is really like us being or wanting to be very true to the experience, and really wanting to like evoke a realistic or even a hyper realistic experience of it. But also there's an aspect of fantasy that we like to kind of add in, sort of like realism with a twist. So I'm gonna give like an example of something kind of similar, like in the media that we like to consume. I really love to read, and we both really love to read speculative fiction, which is like very, typically it's the setting is very, very realistic. It's just like reality, except like one aspect of reality is kind of tweaked in some way, and then they kind of tell a story about, you know, how that would affect people's relationships, or, you know, how they would move through the world. And it kind of reflects how we kind of approach our perfumery, like very realistic with like kind of like an interesting kind of fantastical twist.
Yeah, and thinking about our environments and just small everyday things that we might overlook as something that's worthwhile to create a story around as well. It is a very long process. One of the things that we start with is a GCMS, gas chromatography spectrometry, GCM. mass spectrometry. Gas chromatography mass spectrometry. Usually just say GCMS. Anyway, so we'll start with a GCMS of a specific thing like rice, like melon, let's see, like a tomato leaf, and then we'll see what the specific like scent molecules like researchers have found in them, and that's kind of the jumping off point where we'll try to find suppliers who might carry those specific molecules so that we can like build from basically the molecular level. And then when we're on our suppliers websites too, like we will search by the descriptions, and basically try to narrow down to the materials that we think most closely fit the brief. And then we'll get them, we'll evaluate them, and if we feel like something is missing, we'll just go back through the process and see what else we can find.
We do also use a lot of naturals. I mean, if naturals are available, it's really nice to use naturals because they're just so much more complex. And sometimes they're longer lasting on skin. But yeah, we don't always have like the luxury of using like the natural materials directly, or there's some limitation on them because of IFRA. So, but yeah, it's kind of like a mix. But yeah, just gathering all of the materials and then evaluating them. I feel like that takes as long or longer than the actual like formulation. Yeah, sometimes because we're just like, oh, like we don't think that we have like enough or like the right materials to kind of produce the effect that we're looking for.
And even in like the process of making like an accord or making like the full batch of the perfume, we might be like, ooh, but what if we tried this thing? Well, let's see what happens. It's a lot of just playing around and seeing what the outcome is.
Yeah, I would say like a big part of our philosophy is around commitment. Being really committed, like, to hyper-real, like really evoking that environment, really having you feel like you're there, maybe hopefully having you feel the emotional experience of being in that environment as well. Whether it's positive, like, happy, like joyful, or sometimes it's longing, or sometimes even sad, depending on, the person's personal experience. Like maybe they haven't, one example is we had a customer who she grew up in Hawaii and hadn't been there for, many years, and she smelled Great Lay and she kind of started tearing up, and it was because it really reminded her of being home, and it was kind of bittersweet. Really, it was really positive memories, but kind of very longing. And so we again, like we love having those experiences. We want people to have like an emotional response. We want them to feel something when they smell our perfumes. And then another part of the commitment is, we made a commitment to our community through our brand. We knew that when we started it, we wanted to, we wanted to benefit other people. We didn't just want to profit off of, okay, this art. That's great. But yeah, I mean, as artists, it feels like we could do more. So we, committed to donating 10% of our profits to rotating charities that help, folks in our community or the global community. And we've also committed to being kind of active publicly, like, and to share, what our beliefs are, and to encourage other people to do the same, and to fundraise as well, through social media. So yeah, like I feel like a lot of it is around commitment.
Yeah, commitment and passion, and both of us really love art that destabilizes us in some way, that makes us feel very like curious, and it inspires us to really take a look at the things that we take for granted. And going through this process, a lot of what we wanted to do is create art that also sparks that in other people. And so one of my favorite reactions that people have will be like, oh, this literally smells like I'm there. We want to make people feel transported in an emotional way, and almost in like a pseudo tangible way as well. And I think like it's easy to make something beautiful, but we didn't want to get stuck with beautiful, right? Like art that makes you feel something oftentimes is a little messy and it's a little like grungy, and all of our perfumes have like an element of a material where we're like, oh, that's a little nasty, but it's just right. Yeah, and so also with like our commitment to our communities, there is this strange narrative that businesses are like separate from political issues, but we see specifically in the United States that's never been true, right? And we, as much as with our art we wanted to break down that separation between perfume and the natural world and what you smell, breaking down the idea of that barrier between business and like civic action. And yeah, it's been a very interesting process, like trying to navigate that in a way that feels like true to us, and also in a way that feels sustainable too. We had a perfumer that we met in an event who smelled our work, and the first thing he said when he smelled our perfume was like, oh, your perfume smells really rich. And as anti-capitalist, I immediately knew he didn't mean like, oh, it smells like luxury, because that's never what we've ever aimed for, but that our perfumes smell full. And for us, like when we're evoking joy across our line, even in like some of our darkest perfumes, there's also this bittersweet quality to them. And so we take our sweet with our bitter. And honestly, like, I guess it doesn't matter as much to me, like, how someone feels about the perfume, as long as they feel something, right? Because you can smell a perfume that is beautiful and it's just, like, flatlined, right? It's like, oh, it's pretty. But if you smell something that just, like, startles you, kind of disgusts you, like, one of my favorite perfumes is Animal Cafe. It's by Three Virgo, I can't remember. But the first smell is so barnyardy. It's just like nasty. That's a hoof. That is a barn that needs to get cleaned. And then as I kept smelling it, it just started evolving and kind of like sinking its claws in. And I was like, ooh, this is like kind of Moorish. Like I want more of it. It's so good
And intriguing.
Yeah, and dirty.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I really want people to feel something. It doesn't have to be, again, specific to the way we feel about anything, but just that it's moving. We were talking earlier about kind of like what is like an equivalent kind of metaphor, and what we thought of was, I guess, destination photos, when people take like a destination photo and it's gorgeous. It's the saturation is just right, and
Highlight.
Yeah, just like everything like looks perfect, and I'm like, oh, that's beautiful, but I don't feel anything about that. But what I feel like, I remember feeling things about is actually going somewhere, the good and the bad. Like the most memorable trips to me are where things go well and they also go wrong. Like things that we didn't expect to happen. And that makes things memorable. And so, I mean, I think that's also part of why we want things to be like hyper realistic, but not just hyper realistic and beautiful, but like to have like that maybe bitterness or like a slightly intriguing funk. Like why is that there? But it's not bad. It's just, it kind of paints a fuller picture.
Yeah.
And we hope on a more emotional picture.
Like one of the most memorable parts of when we went to Portugal was finding out that the RV we had rented for the trip, and it wasn't listed in the description of the RV, that it was manual. And neither one of us had ever driven manual.
Yeah.
And Debbie learned on the fly. It was very much queer audacity on those narrow little roads.
I read an article. I've seen it done before.
We know the general
We did need help to get it out of park and into reverse. They have I won't go into it, but like it's an interesting way that some of the older cars, like you have to do it. You can't just press a button.
It was like from the 80s.
You have to like pull this thing up, and then you get it was weird. But I've never sweat as much driving in a car as I did like the first 24 hours of driving. But I'm never going to forget it. Like, never.
I know, I kept smelling it. I was like, oh, you're 10.
So we're gonna have a 80s Portuguese Winnebago themed fragrance of Liverlazo.
It's gonna be a sweaty one, Jack. It's gonna smell like pastel de nata and scent wet and diesel fuel.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things for us is that we have never fit the norm in the United States, right? And what that means is like we've never felt very attached to tradition. And so at least in the perfume industry, there is like a valorization of French perfumery specifically, but we're entirely self-taught, and we like see the value in that school of thought and practice, but it's not something that we aspire to. And so I think as we're going through our creative process, we're not locked down by like what is considered beautiful, like what is a worthy story to tell. Like we're very much willing to kind of blur those lines, if that's clear enough.
Yeah, I agree. Right. We're not tied to how a thing should be made or what it should be at the end of the composition. We're not tied to whether it should be a scent for men or for women.
Yeah.
Whether this idea for a scent should be a perfume. Yeah. So there. I feel like coming from the perspective of, I guess, oftentimes feeling like you're kind of on the outside looking in, like you don't have to feel like you have to conform to any particular expectations. But on the flip side, you mentioned how is it received. I never really expected our work to be received, I guess, with open arms necessarily, just because we're not following conventions. I mean, that's what happens in, every other part of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not if you don't fit the expectations that other people have, there is a degree of like kind of the inside group and the outside. But that being said, we didn't know anything about the artisan and kind of indie or niche community in the perfume space until we, last year went to the Art and Old Fashion Awards, and that was amazing because there were a lot of other perfumers that, are self-taught, who have a different perspective, who don't feel constrained to making perfumes in a certain way or have them smell within a certain kind of boundary of what is beautiful.
Yeah, we met some of our favorite people there, and people who were really taking risks with their perfumes, and that I think like really affirmed for us that what we were doing was valuable, was still valid. Yeah, and I think that was very necessary, because otherwise we might have just been in our own echo chamber of like, are we creating something worthwhile? Like, and still having that nervousness, even if we're just like, we've always kind of been on the outside and just kind of forged our own path,
One challenge is this a perfume? We get a lot of, I don't know if they're opinions or like requests for like, oh, I like how this smells, but specifically I would want this as a roux scent.
Mm-hmm.
I want this in or as a candle. I want this in a different format. I don't feel like this is a perfume. I don't feel like this is something that, I like how it smells, but I don't want to smell like this.
Mm-hmm.
don't think I want to wear this. And so I think that's been kind of challenging in the sense of, because, you know, I'm not necessarily trying to convince someone. If that's the way you feel, that's the way you feel. But trying to kind of give them our perspective in terms of, I mean, we think you should, you know, you should like the way you smell. And it doesn't have to be in a prescribed way. It doesn't have to, you don't have to smell like you're wearing perfume or you're wearing cologne. You can smell like something that you know, gives you an emotional response, whether it makes you feel happy, it makes you feel at peace, it makes you feel invigorated. That's what we were setting out to do with our perfumes. And so, you know, ideally you would want to have that kind of experience and be able to take that with you anywhere. You don't have to be constrained to like doing this at home.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, I don't know, in your car. So that was one of kind of the challenges that we kind of face in creating perfumes that aren't, I guess, typical.
Yeah.
They don't match typical scent profiles.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have a very preconceived idea of what a perfume is supposed to smell like. And really what they're looking for is one of the about dozen materials that are put into commercial perfumes, like your musks and some of those materials that are used for longevity, but they have a very distinct characteristic that people immediately go, oh, that's a perfume. And one of the things that we've noticed too is one of our more popular perfumes at shows, it's Beachberry, and it has like the highest number of synthetics. And that is when people are like, oh, yes, this smells like a perfume. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, they're all perfumes. And so I think if we didn't have Beachberry in the line and didn't have that kind of perspective of like, oh, you don't think this smells like a perfume, but you think Beachberry does, and knowing what we know about the formulation behind Beachberry, you're like, oh, I see what you're looking for. Got it. But one of the cool things is that we never really get that reaction at queer shows or punk shows. Never. People take them as they are, which is exactly why we love doing queer and punk shows. That's like our primary audience, which we knew from the beginning.
That's a reflection of those communities.
Yep.
I think accepting people as they are.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
ethos. That's very cool.
Yeah, and they like that they're different, and they like that they don't actually have that like perfumey quality that a lot of people are looking for. And so it's nice. We can see who our audience is.
Right. I guess, I mean, even aside from just like the fragrances that, you know, we've crafted and released, even the format, some people actually will appreciate that they're oil based, and some people are like, I only want a spray perfume.
Yeah.
They really want it to be alcohol based for whatever reason.
And so just that's like a sensory thing, which I totally get. They prefer the sensory quality. But sometimes it's just a perception of it actually being more perfume-like if you spray it.
Yeah.
Rather than like an essential oil blend, where sometimes people denigrate that. And I'm like, it's still a form of what we're doing, you know? Yeah. Perfumery tries to be apolitical. The industry does, and we can see factually like that's not true. Like you can look at the sourcing of materials, you can look at who gets accolades when it's not a blind judging. And what we've been noticing specifically in this time since, you know, October 7th, to be explicit, is that there has been a lot of silence in the perfume industry about genocide in Gaza, about just world issues, and it sits in this strange dichotomy where we will see brands take a political stance for things that are more crowd-pleasing, They're more accessible to an audience. They can feel good about them. It can be used as a good marketing story, or if it's something that personally affects the person behind the brand. And from my perspective, like, I think just having the information out there through your brand is still important, but you can see that sometimes the motivation isn't necessarily geared to a larger conversation or like coalition building within the industry. And I think over time, in the last several months, we have been seeing more people just through, you know, conversations with peers in the industry who are starting to be like, okay, like, I can't stay quiet anymore. Like, we've had people reach out to us and say, like, you know what, like, thank you for posting all this time. I've been watching, I've been paying attention, but I've been so terrified to say anything because I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. No one in my life cares about this. And you can tell, like, a lot of people's hearts are there, but there is a lot of fear, a lot of concern around their, like, financial stability when their brand is their primary way of supporting themselves. And I think for us, like, we made a commitment through Samar from the beginning, as Debbie was saying, and we knew going in that sometimes the things that we were going to say and advocate for are going to be contentious, and we would have to choose whether we were going to be courageous or we were going to just kind of sink into the capitalist machine. And we chose to be courageous and lose some sales, because we know that there are customers who don't agree with us. When we first started speaking out about genocide, like, we got some wild emails, you know, like, we got pushback. We had people who were just like, you're a business, basically shut your mouth and just sell, right? And it's like, we have big businesses donating to political parties.
Yeah.
Historically, always. It's rarely not been a thing. And so this is a false paradigm that you're trying to set up, where you're like, just because you sell things, you need to prioritize that instead of the fact that we're allowing people to be actively harmed. Our tax dollars are going towards people being harmed. Our government has rarely represented the interests of the most marginalized people in our country. And if we can be at least, like, one brand using our platform, because that's the thing too, is, like, a lot of brands are gonna have a larger platform, a larger reach, then it feels like our responsibility to do that. And I do think it has been beneficial in some ways for other brands to see us doing that, and to, like, have these really intimate conversations with other creators who are wondering how to approach this, and just kind of, like, help them figure out a guiding point that makes sense for what their brand is, right? Like, not everyone has to speak out in the same way that we're doing, but are you someone who is just naturally already very generous? Like, there you go. You can put out a scent that's specifically going to benefit the issue at hand. Yeah, it was very disappointing for a long time, you know, but as time has passed, and I think more people have started really thinking about their values and like how they want to remember their actions in the future, more people have started speaking up and being willing to, like, risk their reputation, risk their status, and, like, risk the thing that is kind of keeping them afloat. And I don't have that expectation of everyone, of course, but all issues of justice are going to require some level of risk, and it's up to you what that level is. And hopefully, you know, through Samar, like, we can encourage people to continue evaluating what that looks like for them, and just knowing that like we will support them. Like, you're not going to be floundering on your own. We floundered on our own for a while. We're like, this is not it, right? And so we're like, no, we will hold it down for you.
To the point of risk, right? I mean, I think that's rightly so why people are afraid to speak out, especially when it's a controversial subject. And, you know, like Emily said, you know, we from the beginning were committed to advocating for our causes, and so it made sense for us to do it and just jump in and take the risk. And I think, to your point, yes, it was great that other people could see us doing it, but that they could also see that it wasn't the end of the world for us. Like, it was a risk, and, you know, I know we lost sales, but at the end of the day, right? Like, I mean, a colossal amount of sales? No, you know. Did other people kind of see our content and kind of see our values and become interested in what we were doing? I think so, right? So it's not to say that it was a wash, but I mean, it was worth doing what we did. And then even if we had lost out on more sales than we did, I still think it would have been worth it. But I'm glad that at least, I mean, I don't know if it encouraged people, but at least made people hopefully less worried and less afraid and more willing to speak out and to get active.
We'll also be in Seattle September 21st, I believe, for this CID night market. It'll be right in the International District, and that goes from 1 to 9 p.m. Yeah, and that's one of our favorite markets. So that's why we're willing to like go up there. And then for projects we're working on. Okay, so one of our projects, it actually has been like a long time coming, but we had this really great kismet moment with the perfumer James from Degree last year when we came here for Art and Olfaction, and we've been talking about kind of the same like challenges we were having with having more unusual perfumes, and you know, how to like communicate our work and find our audience. And we were like, yeah, we're thinking about, you know, doing some like savory gourmands, and one of the ones we're thinking about doing is pho. And Jane was like, I thought about doing pho, but I didn't think anyone would want it. And we were like, James, do it. And so James actually released his pho perfume, Fauget, I have a model of it too, in the spring. And then we're planning to release our pho perfume at some point where we can get all the materials. We've got a supplier that's, you know, taking a little minute. But then we're gonna do like a collab set where we put the two perfumes together, because his goes more like herbaceous and bright, and we're gonna have a little bit more of like the savory soup, because some of us want to smell like soup. So I'm very excited about that.
Get to play with humidity. And,
yes, humidity and rice tincture and rice molecules. Yeah.
And so I'll be working on a kind of rose-centric perfume. Not historically like one of my favorites. I don't dislike rose, but it's pretty, but it's, you know, I don't know. I guess I don't have the emotional reaction to it. But I want to do something kind of like interesting. So gonna do like a Romeo and Juliet inspired kind of deal where it's not just rose at the center. So there's going to be some interesting notes that I'm going to be taking from the text. So different kinds of like ideas around like botanicals, maybe a little bit of fruit. Okay, I'll keep that a little, reveal that as I actually like get closer to like orvulating and like being like, okay, yeah, it smells okay.
Gonna have a little punk quality to it.
Yeah.
Hello.
We're